The average downsizer in the UK pays around £5,000 in stamp duty on a £300,000 retirement bungalow. That's the number every headline shouts at you. Don't downsize. HMRC will take £5,000 just for moving. You've probably seen that advice. You've probably repeated it. But here's the calculation that doesn't get printed on the front page. Staying in your 4-bedroom family home, the one you rattled around in once the kids left, cost you roughly £3,000 a year in extra heating, council tax and maintenance. Over 5 years, that's £15,000 out of your retirement savings, 3 times the stamp duty you were trying to avoid. So which is the real trap, moving or staying still? In this video, I'm going to walk you through the 5-year break-even calculation that flips the standard advice on its head. We'll look at the actual moving costs, the ongoing savings you're missing, and the impact on your benefits and inheritance planning. Because once you see the full picture, the maths points somewhere most people don't expect. If you're a homeowner over 60 trying to work out whether downsizing makes sense for you, subscribe now. I'll show you how to avoid the hidden costs on both sides of this decision. Not just the one the headlines keep telling you about. Let's start with the actual numbers, because this is where most people go wrong. If you're buying a retirement property at £300,000, your stamp duty bill works out at roughly £5,000. The first £125,000 is taxed at 0%. The next £125,000 is taxed at 2%, which is £2,500. The final £50,000 is taxed at 5%, which is another £2,500. That gives you £5,000 in stamp duty. Add a typical estate agent fee of around 1.5% on the sale. That's £4,500 on a £300,000 sale, plus solicitor fees of around £1,500 and removals at around £1,500, and you're looking at roughly £12,000 in total moving costs. That's real money. Nobody is pretending otherwise, but that £12,000 is a one-off. You pay it once and it's done. The trap is that this upfront number is so visible, so concrete, that it blinds people to what's draining away quietly every year they stay put. Think about what it actually costs to run a 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom family home in retirement. Council tax on a Band D property currently runs at around £2,200 a year in England. Move to a Band C and you're saving around £400 annually. Your heating bill in a larger property is typically £600 to £800 a year, more than it would be in a smaller one. Maintenance and garden upkeep, which often feels like a constant cycle of repairs, decorating and contractors, easily adds £1,000 a year. Buildings and contents insurance on a larger property is a further £100 a year more than on a smaller one. That's a conservative saving of around £2,100 a year just from moving to a more manageable home. Figures from Money Help and Which put the realistic saving closer to £3,000 a year once you factor in all the running costs people undercount. So run that forward. Over 5 years, staying in your current home costs you £15,000 in extra running costs. Moving costs you £12,000 once. By year 5, you are already £3,000 ahead. And every year after that, you're saving £2,100 to £3,000 that stays in your pocket. I helped my own mother work through this calculation last year, and I saw how easy it is to fixate on the upfront bill and miss the bigger picture. When you're standing in an estate agent's office being handed a quote, the £12,000 feels enormous. The annual savings feel theoretical. They're not. They're as real as the council tax bill that lands on your mat every April. But that's just the direct cost picture. What about the effect on your benefits, your care planning, and the inheritance you want to leave behind? That's where the second layer of this decision sits, and it's where the standard advice gets things badly wrong. The right way to think about downsizing isn't, will I lose money up front? It's, how quickly will I break even, and what happens after that? Because once you shift the question, the whole decision looks different. Let me walk you through a real example. Margaret is 67. She's a widow living in a £400,000 three-bedroom semi in Surrey. Her current annual running costs are heating at £2,800, council tax at £2,000, maintenance and garden at £1,500. That's £6,300 a year to keep that house running. She moves to a £250,000 two-bedroom bungalow. Her new running costs: heating at £1,600, council tax at £1,500, maintenance at £300. That's £3,400 a year. The annual saving is £2,900. Now look at her moving costs. Stamp duty on a £250,000 purchase at current rates works out at £2,500. The first £125,000 at 0%, the next £125,000 at 2%, giving exactly £2,500. Add a 1% estate agent fee at £2,500 on the sale, solicitors at £1,500, and removals at £1,500. Total moving costs £9,500. Divide £9,500 by her annual saving of £2,900, and Margaret breaks even in 3.3 years. Not 5 years, not 10. 3.3 years after that, she is £2,900 better off every single year for as long as she lives in that bungalow. I used to think exactly what the headlines say, that downsizing was a tax trap. When my mother first raised it with me, my instinct was to tell her to stay put. It wasn't until I sat down and ran the numbers over a 5-year horizon that I realized I had it completely backwards. That was a humbling moment, and it changed how I think about this. So the true cost of downsizing isn't the £5,000 stamp duty or the £10,000 in moving fees. The true cost of staying put is the £3,000 a year that quietly disappears into a home that's too big for the life you're actually living. The 5-year break-even shows that staying often costs you more and leaves you with less money for the years when your health is good and you actually want to spend it. But wait, doesn't releasing that cash from your home expose you to care home means testing? That's the second concern I hear constantly, and it's the one I want to address directly next. One of the most common objections I hear to downsizing is this: if I sell up and release cash from my home, the local authority will take it all in care home fees. It sounds logical, but the reality is more complicated and more reassuring than that objection suggests. Let's go back to Margaret. She stays in her £400,000 house and needs residential care at 78. She lives alone, with no spouse or dependent living in the property. In that situation, the local authority includes the value of the house in the means test. There is no automatic protection for a single person's home once they move into care. She will need to sell that property to fund her fees. Now look at the alternative. Margaret downsizes to a £250,000 bungalow and releases £150,000 in equity. Some of that she spends, perhaps on the move itself, on travel, on helping her children, and the rest she saves. As long as she's still living in the bungalow, its value is disregarded in the means test. Only her savings count. The key point is this: the big house was not truly protected either. If you are single and you need care, the council will eventually include that property. Downsizing first may actually reduce the total asset base that gets drawn on. Now there's a separate concern around pension credit, and this one is worth being clear about. If Margaret was receiving pension credit while living in her large house, because her savings were low and the house value is disregarded for that purpose, releasing £150,000 in equity could push her savings above £16,000, which is the upper capital limit for pension credit. She would lose that entitlement. The average pension credit award is roughly £3,640 a year, so that is a real cost to weigh up. But here's the full picture. Her annual saving from downsizing is £2,900. The pension credit loss is roughly in the same range. On a pure income basis, she's broadly neutral in the short term. and she now has a cash lump sum she can invest for additional income in a home she can actually manage. It's a trade-off, not a disaster. And for many people, once you run the whole net number, the result is neutral or slightly positive. The point is, the care home fear and the benefit loss fear are real considerations, but they're not automatic arguments against downsizing. They need to be calculated, not assumed, and the assumption that staying in the big house is always the safer option doesn't hold up when you look at how means testing actually works. There's one more argument you often hear against downsizing. If I sell the family home, I'll lose the residence nil rate band, and my children will face a bigger inheritance tax bill. It's a genuine worry, and it deserves a straight answer. The residence nil rate band is currently £175,000 per person. If you stay in your larger home and leave it to your children or grandchildren, that allowance applies automatically. So far, so good. But what happens if you downsize to a smaller property? HMRC has a specific provision for exactly this situation. It's called the downsizing addition. If you sold or gave away a larger home on or after the 8th of July 2015 and the equivalent value is left to direct descendants in your estate, you can still claim the full residence nil rate band as if you had stayed in the original home. The allowance doesn't disappear just because the house you're living in at the time of death is smaller or worth less. So downsizing does not automatically hurt your inheritance tax position. If you plan it properly, making sure the released equity is left to direct descendants, the allowance is preserved. It's an area where getting proper advice pays for itself many times over, but the mechanism exists specifically so that people aren't penalized for making a sensible housing decision. You now have the full picture, the costs, the savings, the care home reality, the benefit trade-off, and the inheritance tax position. But the hardest part of this decision isn't the maths, it's everything that sits underneath it. The biggest barrier to downsizing for most people isn't financial, it's the guilt. Your children say, "Mum, you can't sell the family home. Your neighbours have been there 30 years and aren't going anywhere." Every article you read tells you that moving will cost you thousands. So you stay, not because the numbers add up, but because leaving feels like giving something up. I understand that completely. A house isn't just bricks and mortar. It's the kitchen where your children grew up, the garden you built over decades, the street where everything feels familiar. Wanting to hold on to that is not irrational, it's human. But there's something worth sitting with here. Feeling guilty for wanting a home you can actually live in. One you can manage without spending every weekend on maintenance, without dreading the next boiler bill, without climbing stairs that are getting harder each year. That guilt isn't protecting you. It's costing you £3,000 a year and a significant amount of your daily ease. I'll be honest about something. When I helped my aunt downsize last year, she cried on moving day, I wasn't sure we'd made the right call. 6 months later, she rang me. She said it was the best decision she'd made in years. She had money she wasn't spending on upkeep, a home she could actually keep warm in winter, and she'd used some of the released equity to visit her grandchildren twice that year. The grief of leaving was real. So was what came after. The shift that helps most people is this: your home should serve your life, not the other way around. You are not obliged to stay in a house that's too big for you to manage just to keep a number on paper looking large. If the break-even is 3 years and you're in good health now, then every year you delay is a year of savings, and a year of easier living that you don't get back. That's the emotional side. Now let's make it practical. If you're seriously considering this, here's how to think it through properly, without guessing and without relying on a single conversation with an estate agent who has an obvious interest in you selling. Step 1. Calculate your total moving costs honestly. That means stamp duty on the purchase price at current rates, your estate agent's fee on the sale. Get at least 3 quotes, because 1% and 1.5% are both common, and on a £400,000 property, that's a £2,000 difference. Solicitor fees, which typically run between £1,200 and £1,800, and removals, which are typically between £1,000 and £2,500, depending on how much you're moving and how far. Write it all down in a single number. Step 2. Estimate your annual savings from downsizing. Pull out your current council tax bill. It's probably on direct debit and you haven't looked at it in years. Look at your energy bills averaged over 12 months, not just summer. Think honestly about what you spend on maintenance, garden, decorating, and repairs. Then estimate the equivalent costs for the smaller property you're considering. The gap between those two numbers is your annual saving. Step 3. Divide your moving costs by your annual saving. That's your break-even point in years. If the answer is under 5 years and you're in reasonable health, downsizing almost certainly makes financial sense. If it's under 3 years, as it was for Margaret, the case is very strong. Step 4. Protect the equity you release. Each tax year you have a £20,000 ISA allowance. Use it. Any interest or returns inside an ISA are completely free of income tax and capital gains tax. If you're a non-taxpayer or basic rate taxpayer, premium bonds are worth considering too. They're government-backed and prizes are tax-free. Step 5. Check your benefit position before you move, not after. If you're currently on pension credit or council tax reduction or any means-tested support, speak to a qualified independent financial advisor before you complete. Don't assume you'll lose everything. Run the actual net numbers, including your downsizing saving. For many people, the result is much more balanced than they expected. But you need the full picture before you decide, not afterwards. And if your children are saying, "Mum, stay in the house for our inheritance," show them the maths from this video. If you invest your annual savings wisely and the break-even is 3 years, they may actually end up with more in the long run than if you spent the next 15 years maintaining an oversized property out of money that could have been working for all of you. That's the practical side covered. Let's bring this together. So let's put this together. The never downsize advice is too simple. The upfront cost of moving, stamp duty, agent fees, solicitors, removals is real, and it's typically around £9,000 to £12,000 depending on the property. But it is a one-off. The annual cost of staying in a home that's too large for you is also real, and at £2,100 to £3,000 a year, it keeps going year after year after year. When you run the 5-year break-even, downsizing often wins. When you look at care planning, the big house isn't automatically protected for a single person. When you factor in the residence nil rate band, the downsizing addition exists precisely to make sure you're not penalized for making a sensible decision. And when you look at the benefit picture honestly, the outcome is often more balanced than the fear suggests. Your home should serve your life. If a smaller, more manageable property gives you lower bills, less upkeep, and more cash to enjoy your 60s and 70s, then downsizing isn't a tax trap. It's a retirement decision that the numbers and the lived reality often support. If this has been useful, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I cover retirement planning decisions like this regularly, the ones where the standard advice isn't quite the full story. And drop a comment below. Are you thinking about downsizing? What's holding you back? I read everyone, and your question might shape the next video.